I watched the taillights of our SUV disappear around the bend, my half-eaten pretzel growing cold in my hand. The interstate rest stop hummed with the sound of idling trucks and the distant wail of a child somewhere near the vending machines. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my stepsister, Emma. Oops, didn't realize you weren't in the car until we were back on the highway. We're already 30 miles away. Figure it out. I deleted the message without responding. This was the fourth time they'd accidentally left me behind on a family road trip. The fourth time in this life, anyway. In my previous life, it had been five. The fifth time had been in winter, at a rest stop in Montana, and I'd gotten pneumonia trying to get home. I died 3 weeks later, my stepmother sighing about funeral costs while Emma tried on my jewelry. But I remembered everything. Every slight, every cruelty, every calculated act of malice disguised as forgetfulness. And this time, I had no intention of calling them back, of begging them to return for me, of climbing back into that car and pretending everything was fine. This time, I had a different number to dial. My finger hovered over the contact I'd saved as Plan B for the past 6 months. In my previous life, I'd never known my biological father existed. My mother had died when I was 3, and my stepmother, Patricia, had swooped in 6 months later, complete with her 2 daughters from her first marriage. I'd spent 22 years believing I was alone in the world except for the family that treated me like an unpaid servant. But being reborn with full memories of your previous life gives you a certain advantage. You remember things you didn't understand as a child. You notice details that once seemed insignificant, like the name my mother used to whisper when she thought I was asleep, James Chen. It had taken me 3 months after my 18th birthday in this life to track him down. James Chen, tech entrepreneur, venture capitalist, the man my mother had loved before Patricia had systematically erased every trace of him from our home. The man who never knew he had a daughter, because Patricia had intercepted every letter, every attempt at contact, every child support check that could have changed my life. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Lily, are you okay? They left me at the rest stop, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Exit 47 on I-80, just past the state line. And Dad? The words still felt foreign on my tongue, even after 6 months of secret phone calls and DNA tests and carefully built trust. I'm not getting back in that car, not this time, not ever again. There was a pause, then, I'm 3 hours away. Stay in a public area. I'm leaving now. I'll be at the Denny's across the parking lot, I said. I'll order coffee and wait. Lily, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. I'm so glad you called. I'm so glad you're finally letting me help. I hung up and looked at my reflection in the rest stop window. 20 years old, sophomore in college, barely, because Patricia had forgotten to submit my financial aid paperwork 3 semesters in a row, forcing me to take time off to work. Plain brown hair, too thin frame from years of being served smaller portions than my stepsisters. Dark circles under my eyes from studying in the one place Patricia couldn't reach me, the 24-hour library on campus. In my previous life, I'd made it to 22 before their neglect killed me. This time, I was going to make sure I made it to 100. The abuse hadn't started immediately. For the first few months after Patricia married my father, she'd been almost kind. But my father traveled constantly for work. He was a regional sales manager, gone 4 days a week, and the moment his car left the driveway, the mask would slip. It started small. Emma and her younger sister Sophie got name-brand clothes. I got thrift store rejects. They got music lessons and dance classes. I got a list of chores that somehow took exactly as long as their extracurriculars lasted. They got birthday parties with their friends. I got a cupcake with a single candle and a card signed with Patricia's looping, passive-aggressive handwriting, "To our little helper." My father noticed nothing, or maybe he chose not to notice. In my previous life, I'd made excuses for him. He was busy, he was tired, Patricia was clever about hiding it. But in this life, with the clarity of adult memories in a child's body, I saw the truth. He was a coward who picked an easy second wife over his complicated daughter. By the time I was 10 in this life, I was essentially raising my stepsisters. I made their lunches, helped with their homework, braided their hair for school photos while Patricia slept off her mimosa breakfasts. I cleaned the house every Saturday while they went to the mall, I cooked dinner 4 nights a week, learned from YouTube videos, watched on an ancient laptop that had been Emma's before she got a new MacBook. The rest stop incident started when I was 15. We were driving to Sophie's volleyball tournament in another state. I'd asked to stop for the bathroom. Patricia had sighed like I'd requested we detour to Paris, but she'd pulled over. I went inside, used the facilities, bought a bottle of water with the $5 I'd saved from recycling cans. When I came out, the car was gone. I'd stood there for 20 minutes, panic rising in my throat, before my phone buzzed. Emma's text. "Oops, we forgot you. We're too far to turn around. Dad says to take a bus home. Here's Mom's credit card number for the ticket." Except Patricia had immediately reported the card stolen the moment I tried to use it. I'd had to call my father, crying, begging him to send money for a bus ticket. He'd been annoyed I was interrupting his work, but he'd done it. And when I finally got home 12 hours later, Patricia had looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Maybe if you weren't so forgettable, we'd remember you were there." It happened again 6 months later, and again the following year. Each time they got bolder. The texts got meaner, the wait got longer. Once they didn't realize I was missing for 4 hours. In my previous life, the fifth incident had killed me. This time, I'd been preparing for the fourth because I remembered everything. I remembered dying alone in a hospital room while Patricia filed paperwork to claim my tiny life insurance policy, one my father had taken out when I was born that he'd somehow never updated to remove Patricia as beneficiary. I remembered Emma selling my textbooks and keeping the money. I remembered Sophie moving into my room before my body was cold, repainting it pink and throwing away the few possessions I'd treasured. But most importantly, I remembered the lawyer's words at my funeral, speaking to a friend of my mother's who'd shown up to pay respects. Such a tragedy. If she'd only known about her biological father's trust fund, none of this would have happened. James Chen tried for years to find her, but her stepmother blocked every attempt. The trust matures when she turns 21, $12 million. Now it'll go to distant cousins. $12 million, a father who wanted me, a life I could have had. So when I was reborn, waking up as a 3-year-old just months before my mother's death, with the memories of 22 years sharp and painful in my mind, I'd made a plan. I couldn't save my mother, her cancer was too advanced. But I could save myself. I played the perfect, forgettable daughter for 15 years. I let Patricia and her daughters think I was weak, passive, easily manipulated. I documented everything, every forgotten meal, every time I was left to watch the girls while Patricia went on spa weekends, every college application she accidentally threw away. I saved screenshots and emails. I kept a journal hidden in a locked box at my best friend's house. And when I turned 18 with adult clarity and childhood patience finally converging, I'd hired a private investigator to find James Chen. The DNA test came back 99.99% positive. My father cried when I sent him the results. He'd been searching for me for 18 years, he said. Patricia had moved us 3 times without forwarding addresses. She'd changed our phone numbers. She'd threatened legal action when he tried to visit, claiming he was a stalker with no proof of paternity. But she'd never expected me to find him first. We'd been building our case for 6 months. Every instance of financial abuse, every educational opportunity sabotaged, every documented incident of neglect. My father's lawyers were thorough, patient, and increasingly angry on my behalf. Child Protective Services was hard to mobilize for a legal adult, but financial exploitation of a minor, educational sabotage, theft of child support payments, that they could work with. I'd known this road trip would be my opportunity. Patricia had been getting nervous. I was about to turn 21, and somehow she'd found out about the trust fund. She'd been nicer lately, almost desperately so, talking about how we should rebuild our relationship now that I was practically an adult. She'd even suggested this trip, a family bonding experience to celebrate my upcoming birthday. I'd pretended to believe her, packed my bag with only things I didn't care about losing, left my laptop with my father, my documents, my real possessions, brought only my phone, some cash, and the knowledge that this was the last time I'd ever have to pretend. When Emma had suggested stopping at this rest stop, 70 miles from home, I'd volunteered to go in first. I'd taken my time, browsing the gift shop, buying a pretzel I didn't want, and I'd watched in the reflection of the glass door as Patricia herded Emma and Sophie into the car, as my father climbed into the driver's seat without looking back as they pulled away without so much as a head count. just like I knew they would, just like they'd done 3 times before. Except this time, I wasn't calling them back. This time, I was calling someone who actually wanted me to come home. The Denny's smelled like maple syrup and burnt coffee. I ordered a Grand Slam breakfast even though it was 3 in the afternoon. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten a meal that wasn't leftovers or something I'd made myself. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Deb, seemed to sense something was off. "You okay, honey?" she asked as she refilled my coffee for the 3rd time. "I will be," I said. "I'm just waiting for my dad." "Your dad know you're here?" "Yeah." I smiled, and it wasn't even forced. "He's on his way. Should be here soon." She patted my shoulder and moved on to the next table, but I caught her keeping an eye on me, making sure I wasn't in trouble. It was more maternal attention than Patricia had shown me in 17 years. My phone buzzed. Patricia. I watched it ring through to voicemail, then listened to the message on speaker, volume low. "Lily, where are you? We just realized you're not in the car. This is so irresponsible. You know we can't just turn around, we're on a schedule. I need you to call me back immediately and figure out how to get home. And you're paying for whatever transportation you take. I'm not enabling this dramatic behavior. We'll discuss your little stunt when you get home." I deleted the message and blocked her number. Next was my father, the man who'd raised me, who'd chosen his convenience over my well-being for 20 years. His voicemail was shorter, tinged with annoyance. "Lily, your mother says you wandered off at the rest stop. I don't have time for these games. Get a bus ticket and we'll talk when you're home." Deleted, blocked. Emma sent 3 texts in rapid succession. "This is so like you, making everything about yourself." "Mom's furious. You've ruined the whole trip." "Don't expect us to come get you. Actions have consequences." I replied to that one. "You're right. Actions do have consequences. Enjoy the trip." Then I blocked her too. And Sophie. And my stepmother's sister, aunt who'd watched Patricia treat me like garbage for years and said nothing. And my father's brother who'd called me dramatic when I'd tried to tell him I was unhappy. By the time I was done, my phone was blissfully quiet. The door chimed. I looked up and there he was. James Chen was 53, tall and lean with silver threading through black hair. He wore jeans and a Stanford hoodie, and his eyes scanned the restaurant with barely concealed anxiety until they landed on me. His whole face transformed, relief and joy, and something that looked like barely suppressed rage all at once. "Lily." He crossed the restaurant in 5 long strides and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "God, I'm so glad you're safe. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry they did this to you again." I let myself sink into the embrace for just a moment, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of being someone's priority. Then I pulled back and gestured to the booth. "Sit. We have a lot to talk about." He slid in across from me and Deb materialized with a coffee cup and a knowing smile. "Your dad?" she asked me. "My dad," I confirmed, and the words felt more real every time I said them. After Deb left, James leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Talk to me. What happened? What's the plan?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the texts, the blocked contacts, the string of messages that documented exactly what had happened. He read them with a face like stone, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "They left you," he said flatly. "Again, they drove away and left you at a rest stop 70 miles from home, and their primary concern is that you're inconveniencing them." "That's what they do," I said. "That's what they've always done. But this time, I'm not going back." "Damn right you're not." He pulled out his own phone, said, "Oh, I'm calling Margaret." My father's lawyer, a woman who'd been treating my case with the fervor of someone with a personal vendetta against child abusers. "She's been waiting for this. We've been waiting for them to do something this egregious, this documented." "It's not enough to charge them," I said, because I'd researched this extensively. "I'm 20. They can argue I'm an adult who chose to stay behind." "But you're not 21 yet," James said. "That trust fund doesn't mature for 8 more months. And I have documentation of every child support payment they stole, every educational opportunity they sabotaged, every instance of financial abuse. Plus," He smiled, and it wasn't kind. I've been doing some digging of my own. Patricia's been writing off your expenses as dependent care for the girls. She's been claiming you as a nanny on her taxes and pocketing the deductions. That's fraud, I blinked. I didn't know that. She's been doing it since you were 12. That's 8 years of tax fraud, Lily. And that's federal. He scrolled through his phone. Margaret's been coordinating with the IRS. We've just been waiting for the right moment, the right triggering incident that we could point to as a clear pattern of abuse. They left me at a rest stop, I said slowly, on camera, with documented texts showing they knew and didn't care. They left you at a rest stop, James agreed. And you're not going back. You're coming home with me, and we're filing for emergency custody transfer. I'm 20. Of your finances and person until you turn 21 based on documented financial exploitation and ongoing emotional abuse. He looked up at me. Margaret already has the paperwork ready. We just needed your say-so. We needed you to be ready to fight. I'd been ready since the moment I woke up in this life with my previous death fresh in my memory. But I'd learned patience, I'd learned strategy, and I'd learned that revenge is a dish best served with overwhelming legal documentation. I'm ready, I said. Let's burn it all down. We drove back to James's house in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by my questions about the legal process and his carefully controlled anger at each new detail I shared. The house was beautiful, a modern craftsman in an upscale neighborhood, nothing like the cramped split level I'd grown up in while Patricia complained about money and wore designer clothes. The guest room is yours, James said as we pulled into the garage. I set up a bedroom for you. When I first found out about you, I hoped. He cleared his throat. There's a bedroom. It's yours if you want it. For as long as you want it. The bedroom was painted a soft gray blue, with a queen bed and a desk and bookshelves waiting to be filled. There was a framed photo on the dresser. My mother, young and laughing, holding a baby. Me, I realized. A version of me I'd never seen, from before Patricia erased every trace of James from our lives. She loved you so much, James said from the doorway. She made me promise if anything happened to her, I'd take care of you. I tried, Lily. God, I tried. But Patricia was always one step ahead, and I didn't have proof you were mine until you found me. I know, I said. I read the court documents. She filed restraining orders. She moved without telling you. She made you look like a stalker. She was protecting her meal ticket, James said bitterly. Your father, Mark, he makes decent money, but not great money. You were the golden goose, a daughter of a tech millionaire with a trust fund that would mature when you turned 21. She just had to keep you docile and under her control until then, and she'd have found a way to access it. She was going to have me sign a power of attorney, I said. She mentioned it last week, said it was for my own good, so she could help me manage my finances since I'm so irresponsible with money. James's face went cold. Over my dead body. That's what I figured. I sat on the bed, testing the mattress. It was firm but comfortable, nothing like the hand-me-down sagging thing I'd slept on at Patricia's house. So what happens now? Now Margaret comes over, you give an official statement, and we file paperwork first thing Monday morning. We'll request an emergency hearing based on the abandonment incident. I'll file for guardianship of your finances until the trust matures with you as a consenting adult. We'll present evidence of the pattern of abuse, the tax fraud, the theft of child support payments. He paused, and we'll make sure the IRS knows exactly what Patricia's been doing. Will I have to see them? Eventually in court, but not until you're ready and not alone. I'll be there. Margaret will be there. We'll make sure you're protected. I nodded slowly, feeling something unfamiliar settling in my chest. Safety, security. The knowledge that someone was on my side, that I wasn't fighting alone. Thank you, I said quietly. For believing me. For helping me. For us, you're my daughter, James said simply. I've been waiting 18 years to be able to say that and have you hear it. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, Lily. Nothing. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, a number I didn't recognize. Don't answer it, James advised. They'll be trying to reach you through friends, through school, through anyone they can think of. Let them panic. Let them wonder. Let them realize they've finally pushed you too far. I silenced the phone and set it aside. He was right. For once in my life, I was going to let someone else worry. Let someone else panic. Let someone else feel abandoned and forgotten and expendable. Margaret arrived an hour later with a briefcase full of documents and a smile that was all teeth. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharper dressed, and she shook my hand like we were forming a battle pact. Lily, I've been looking forward to meeting you in person. James has told me so much. She settled at the dining room table and pulled out a tablet. Now, I need to record your statement about what happened today, and then I need you to walk me through every incident of abuse, neglect, or exploitation you can remember. Take your time. We have all night. I talked for 4 hours. I told her everything. The forgotten meals, the unpaid labor, the sabotaged college applications, the 4 rest stop abandonments. I showed her my hidden documentation, the journal I'd kept at my friend's house, the screenshots and saved emails. I told her about the power of attorney Patricia had tried to manipulate me into signing. Margaret's expression grew more satisfied with each revelation. "This is good," she said when I finally finished, my voice hoarse. "This is very, very good. They've made this almost easy for us, Lily." The abandonment today was the final piece we needed. Clear, documented, indefensible evidence of a pattern of neglect, combined with the financial exploitation, the tax fraud, the theft of James's child support payments. She smiled. "We're going to bury them." "I don't want to bury them," I said, and both she and James looked at me in surprise. "I want to dismantle them. I want them to lose everything they took from me. I want Patricia's reputation destroyed, her finances in ruins, her daughters to understand what it feels like to watch everything fall apart. I want my father, Mark, to realize he chose a comfortable lie over his own daughter. I want consequences that fit the crime." Margaret's smile widened. "Then we're going to get along just fine." The first volley came Monday morning. Emergency custody transfer of my finances, filed in family court with documentation of 18 years of financial exploitation. The second came Tuesday, a formal complaint to the IRS regarding tax fraud, with evidence of Patricia claiming false dependent care deductions. The third came Wednesday, a civil suit for recovery of stolen child support payments, totaling over $300,000 with interest. By Friday, Patricia's lawyer had called begging for a meeting. "Absolutely not," Margaret said coldly. "My client has nothing to say to her abusers. All communication goes through me." I listened on speakerphone from James's living room, where I'd spent the week alternately studying for my classes. I was still enrolled, and James had paid my tuition in full, erasing 2 years of worrying about whether I'd be able to register each semester, and giving statements to various lawyers and investigators. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue abandonment, claiming I'd wandered off and they'd been unable to find me. Until Margaret sent him the rest stop security footage showing them leaving without me, and the text proving they knew exactly where I was. He tried to argue the tax deductions were legitimate. Until Margaret sent him documentation that I'd never been paid a salary, never received a W-2, and was listed as a dependent on Patricia's taxes while simultaneously being claimed as an employee for deduction purposes. He tried to argue that Patricia had legal authority over my finances as my stepmother. Until Margaret sent him James's paternity test, court records of his attempted custody claims, and documentation that Patricia had been intercepting and keeping child support payments meant for my care. By the end of the second week, Patricia's lawyer withdrew from the case. By the end of the third week, Mark had filed for divorce. I watched it all unfold with a satisfaction that my previous life's trauma had earned me. James kept asking if I was okay, if this was too much, if I wanted to slow down, but I'd waited 17 years for this. I'd died without ever getting justice. This time, I was going to see it through to the end. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for a month after the rest stop incident. Margaret coached me extensively, Answer questions directly. Don't volunteer information. Stay calm. Remember that the judge has already read all the documentation. They're going to try to make you look vindictive, she warned. Ungrateful, dramatic. They're going to paint themselves as victims of a troubled young woman with daddy issues. Let them, I said. I have 17 years of documentation that says otherwise. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less dramatic. Patricia sat at the defendant's table with a court-appointed lawyer. She couldn't afford a private attorney anymore, not with her assets frozen, pending the fraud investigation. She'd aged 10 years in a month, her carefully maintained highlights showing gray roots, her designer clothes replaced with something off the rack. Mark wasn't there. He'd filed papers claiming he'd been unaware of the abuse, that Patricia had hidden it from him. It was a cowardly move and exactly what I'd expected from him. Emma and Sophie sat in the gallery, both looking shell-shocked. They'd learned, apparently, that their trust funds, smaller versions of mine, set up by Patricia's first husband, had been raided by their mother years ago. They were as broke as I'd always been, and twice as angry about it. The judge was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She read through the documentation with a face like granite, occasionally asking questions that Patricia's lawyer couldn't adequately answer. Mrs. Davis, the judge finally said, you claimed 8 years of dependent care tax deductions for a child who was never paid, never employed, and whom you simultaneously claimed as a dependent. Can you explain that? Patricia's lawyer tried to argue semantics. The judge shut him down. And you left this young woman at a rest stop 70 miles from home with documented proof that you knew where she was and chose not to retrieve her. Your explanation? It was a misunderstanding. There are text messages, Miss Davis, from your daughter, telling Ms. Chen that she was inconveniencing the family and should find her own way home. Emma was upset. Emma is an adult who witnessed and participated in the abandonment of another adult with documented special circumstances. Next question. You intercepted child support payments from Mr. Chen for 18 years. Where did that money go? Silence. Mrs. Davis, there is over $300,000 unaccounted for. Mr. Chen's payments were sent regularly, documented, deposited into accounts in your name. This money was meant for Ms. Chen's care. Where is it? I used it for her care. Ms. Chen wore thrift store clothes while your daughters wore designer brands. She worked as unpaid labor in your home while your daughters took music and dance lessons. She slept on a hand-me-down mattress in a room the size of a closet while your daughters had the master bedrooms. Where exactly did this money go toward her care? Patricia's lawyer requested a recess. The judge denied it. The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, I'd given my testimony, calm, factual, supported by documentation. James had given his, explaining his 18-year search for a daughter he didn't know was being abused. Margaret had presented financial records, text messages, emails, tax documents, and a timeline that painted a devastating picture of systematic exploitation. The judge didn't even need to deliberate. I'm granting the emergency custody transfer, she said. Mr. Chen is hereby granted full financial guardianship of Ms. Chen until she reaches the age of 21, at which point the trust fund will be transferred to her direct control. Mrs. Davis, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges of fraud, exploitation, and child endangerment. Your accounts will remain frozen pending the outcome of that investigation. You are ordered to pay restitution to Mr. Chen for stolen child support payments in the amount of $317,000 plus interest plus punitive damages. She named a number that made Patricia go white. Payable immediately. If you cannot pay, your assets will be seized and liquidated until the debt is satisfied. But I can't. The house should have thought of that before you stole from your stepdaughter for 18 years. The judge looked at me. Ms. Chen, I'm sorry for what you've endured. I hope this gives you some closure and the ability to move forward with your life. Thank you, Your Honor, I said, and I meant it. We walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight. Margaret was triumphant, already on the phone with the IRS to update them on the court's decision. James put his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, feeling the weight of 17 years finally lifting. Behind us, I heard Sophie crying, Emma shouting at Patricia, the sound of a family imploding under the weight of its own cruelty. I didn't look back. The criminal trial came 4 months later. Patricia was charged with tax fraud, theft, and, thanks to Margaret's tenacious investigation, embezzlement. It turned out she'd been stealing from her employer too, skimming money she thought no one would notice. Apparently, once you start treating people as resources to exploit, it becomes a pattern. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Mark lost his house in the divorce settlement. The court ruled that he'd been negligent in his duty to protect me, and that negligence cost him dearly. He moved into a studio apartment and stopped trying to contact me after I returned his third letter unopened. Emma and Sophie had to drop out of their expensive private colleges when they discovered their trust funds were gone and their mother had no money left for tuition. Last I heard, Sophie was working retail and Emma was living with their aunt, the one who'd called me dramatic for complaining about abuse. The house I'd grown up in was sold to satisfy the restitution judgment. I made sure to be there the day the movers came to clear it out, standing in the driveway with James while Patricia's possessions were loaded into a truck bound for a storage unit she couldn't afford. My old room, the tiny closet they'd given me while Emma and Sophie had spacious bedrooms, was empty except for the hand-me-down furniture they hadn't bothered to take. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, remembering the girl I'd been in both lives, scared, alone, convinced this was normal. "You good?" James asked softly. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good. Let's go home." The trust fund matured on my 21st birthday. $12 million invested wisely by trustees who'd actually had my best interests at heart. James threw me a party. Nothing huge, just close friends and a few family members from his side that I was slowly getting to know. There was cake and laughter and presents that had been chosen because people knew what I actually liked, not because they were obligatory afterthoughts. My best friend Sarah, who'd hidden my journal and supported me through everything, gave me a framed photograph, the two of us at graduation, wearing matching smiles and graduation caps. "To new beginnings," the inscription read. James gave me a key. "It's to the condo downtown," he explained. "Near campus. I thought you might want your own place now that you're officially an adult and independently wealthy." He smiled. "But the bedroom here is still yours whenever you want it." I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you for everything, for not giving up on finding me." "Thank you for finding me first," he said, "and for giving me a second chance to be your father." I used some of the trust fund money to finish my degree, switching to a program I actually wanted, not the one Patricia had pushed me toward because it was practical. I studied creative writing and psychology, fascinated by the intersection of trauma and storytelling. My thesis was on revenge narratives in fiction and why they resonate so deeply with readers. My advisor said it was some of the most insightful work she'd read in years. I didn't tell her it came from personal experience. I used more of the money to start a foundation, resources for children in abusive homes, help navigating legal systems, therapy, and support groups. I called it the Second Chances Foundation, and I made sure every kid who walked through our doors knew they weren't alone, weren't forgotten, weren't expendable. James became my co-director, using his business connections to fund and grow the organization. Within 2 years, we had 3 locations and a waiting list of volunteers who wanted to help. On the 3-year anniversary of the rest stop incident, I drove out to Boz, exit 47, on I-80. The same rest stop, the same Denny's where Deb had made sure I was safe. She was still working there, and she remembered me. "You're that girl," she said, her face lighting up. "The one waiting for her dad." "You look good, honey, real good." "I am good," I said. "Thanks to you. Thanks to everyone who helped me that day." I left her a $1,000 tip and a business card for the foundation. "If you ever meet someone who needs help," I said, "please call me." She hugged me and I let myself feel it, the kindness of strangers, the compassion that exists in the world, even when your family fails you. It was a feeling I'd never gotten from Patricia, but one I was learning to accept from the people who actually cared. I sat in my car in that rest stop parking lot for a long time, watching families come and go. I saw parents herding tired children, teenagers arguing over snacks, older couples stretching their legs on long drives, normal families doing normal things. And I thought about the girl I'd been, both versions of her, the one who'd died from neglect and the one who'd been reborn with the knowledge to save herself. I thought about the rest stop abandonments, the casual cruelty, the years of being treated as less than human by people who were supposed to love me. I thought about revenge and justice and the difference between them. Revenge would have been ruining them simply because I could. Justice was making sure they faced consequences for their actions, that they couldn't hurt anyone else the way they'd hurt me. Justice was building something good from the ashes of my trauma, helping other kids who felt as alone as I once had. I'd gotten both in the end, and it felt exactly as cathartic as I'd hoped. My phone buzzed. A text from James. "Dinner at 7? I'm making your favorite." I smiled and started the car. 17 years too late for my first life, but right on time for my second. I had a father who loved me, a foundation that was changing lives, a future that was entirely my own. I had friends who chose to be there, not family members obligated by blood. And I had the satisfaction of knowing that Patricia was spending her days in a federal prison, Emma and Sophie were learning what it meant to struggle, and Mark was alone with his cowardice. They'd left me at a rest stop, thinking I was disposable, thinking I'd come crawling back, grateful for whatever scraps they threw me. But this time, I never got back in that car. This time, I built my own. And I drove away from them without ever looking back. 5 years after the rest stop incident, I graduated with my PhD. The dissertation on resilience in trauma survivors and the narratives we construct to process our experiences was published by a major academic press and optioned for a popular psychology book. James was in the front row at my graduation, cheering louder than anyone. Sarah was there with her fiancé. My foundation's board members came, celebrating the director's achievement. Mark sent a card. I threw it away without opening it. Patricia was still in prison. She'd tried to reach out twice, once through a reformed letter that Emma had been asked to deliver, once through a request for visitation. I declined both. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her, and closure wasn't something I needed from her. I'd found my own closure in the life I'd built. Emma had actually turned her life around, surprisingly. She'd gotten therapy, worked through her own trauma. Apparently, Patricia had been no kinder to her daughters than to me, just more subtle about it. She'd apologized, a real apology that acknowledged harm without making excuses. I'd accepted it but maintained boundaries. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired, only recognized for what they were. Sophie was still bitter, still blaming me for ruining the family. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd married someone wealthy and was replicating Patricia's patterns with her own stepdaughter. I'd made sure the foundation had resources in her area, hoping that child would find us before it was too late. The book came out to positive reviews. A searing, honest look at family trauma and the paths to healing, one reviewer wrote. Chen's academic rigor combined with clear personal investment makes this essential reading. I did interviews, carefully navigating questions about my own experiences without giving Patricia the satisfaction of being named. Yes, this research is informed by personal experience, I'd say. That's what makes it authentic. The book became a bestseller. The foundation expanded to 10 locations. James and I were profiled in Forbes as father-daughter duo, changing how we support trauma survivors. On the 10-year anniversary of leaving that rest stop, I bought it. The whole rest stop, every business in it, the land beneath it. I converted it into a resource center, shelter, counseling, legal aid, all free of charge. There's a plaque at the entrance. For everyone who's ever been left behind, you matter. You're not forgotten. Help is here. Deb runs it now, her years of waitressing replaced with coordinating services for people in crisis. She's exactly as good at it as I knew she'd be. Sometimes I drive out there and sit in what used to be the Denny's, now converted into a meeting space. I think about that 20-year-old girl with cold coffee and a half-eaten pretzel, watching taillights disappear and knowing that this was her moment to choose differently. I think about the life I lived before dying at 22, never knowing I had options, never knowing I had a father who would have moved mountains for me if he'd been allowed to. I think about revenge and justice and how sometimes they're the same thing. And I think about how the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Taking the pain that was meant to break you and forging it into something that helps others heal. They left me at a rest stop thinking they were abandoning a burden. Instead, freed me to become exactly who I was always meant to be. I never got back in that car, and I never looked back, except to help others find their own way forward.